Welcome to Writers Blockbusters, the show where we treat the final edit of the movie like the script. I'm one of the hosts, Bob Rose, at Thunderground Bob on all relevant social media, and right now, Jamie's going to introduce himself.
Hey, I'm Jamie Nash. I'm a screenwriter. I also wrote the book Save the Cat Writes for TV and the Save the Cat Beat Sheet Workbook. And that's about it. On to Jimmy.
I am Jimmy George. I am a screenwriter and script consultant. And if we're doing it still, my Twitter handle is at Jimmy R. George.
Oh, we're doing it still. No. Today we're going to talk about Mad Max Fury Road, since a new Mad Max movie is in theaters. Before we get into our talking points, we're going to go around and just say, our relationship to this now decade-old movie. Let's start with Jimmy.
So this is going to be less about the relationship to this movie and more about the relationship to the franchise. When I was a kid, my dad totally rented The Road Warrior and Beyond Thunderdome, and I was allowed to watch these things when I was a little kid, but I didn't remember them when it came time to learn screenwriting. So in 1999, when I started writing, I got all the books that were out, which at that time weren't that many. Now there's hundreds.
Right.
And The Road Warrior was a movie that came up in every single book with, instructive lessons, screenwriting lessons about this and about that. So one of the very first movies that I did basically a writer's blockbuster style breakdown for 25 years ago was The Road Warrior. So I learned a lot from that. And that was like part of my journey that led to this, But as far as Fury Road, I saw it once in the theaters in 2015 and I enjoyed it, but it was so damn loud. I feel like I didn't hear like any of the dialogue. And so I thought it was good. I enjoyed it, but that was it. I've never seen it since yesterday. And with subtitles, I feel like I experienced the movie completely different. I mean, a lot of people don't talk about the dialogue for this movie much, but I think what's there is very impactful, what little we get. And it made me love the movie in a way that I didn't the first time I saw it. So, yeah.
Cool. Jamie?
Yeah, it's similar to Jimmy. The one thing I remember about the franchise, this was when we got a VCR for the first time, and my father went to Errol's Video in Security Mall. That's where we used to go. And the first day he was going there to rent movies, he asked me what I wanted. And Road Warrior had just come out. Like, I think it may, well, you'll see where I go with this. Maybe it hadn't even come out. But it was a hard movie to see because it was a foreign film, so it wasn't in every theater. It might have showed up at Westview Theater for a couple weeks. Plus I was young. I was like 8 or 9 years old or something like that. But I had heard about it, whether it was Siskel and Ebert or whatever. Like, there was a buzz about The Road Warrior, and I couldn't wait to see it. So I told him to get it, and he came home with Mad Max. And I didn't even know there was a Mad Max. I didn't know there was a previous movie. So I watched Mad Max, and I really liked Mad Max a lot. And then it was several months later that I think I finally got The Road Warrior. I don't know if it was checked out or if it just hadn't come out yet or something like that. I can't remember how that went. And Road Warrior became like a very seminal top 20 movie for me as a kid. It was just big. Between me and my friends, we loved it. I was a D&D kid, and there was a D&D like game called Gamma World, which was kind of similar to Road Warrior in some ways. That came out in 1978. It had more like mutations and all that kind of weird sci-fi stuff in it than Road Warrior. But yeah, I loved the world, and to me, this was really my first taste of post-apocalyptic anything. For me, this was the invention. This was like the token of that. I'm sure, again, Gamma World came out before, so I'm sure there are other things before it. But to me, this was it. Fast forward to Fury Road. Honestly, not a lot of movies since like the 90s are in my top 50, top 100. They just aren't, for whatever reason, just because, I don't know, movies aren't as as hot to me as they were when I was younger or whatever. But this one was one when I saw it, I was just like, I was kind of blown away by it. Just all the things that happened. Just it really felt like a singular mind. It felt bonkers. It was one of the first movies that I felt really deserved the term bonkers. You know, it was a bonkers movie. It just felt bonkers. Like anything he wanted to do, he did. And that's what it felt like. He took everything up a notch. It was from the dialogue to the stunts to the everything. And I was just kind of blown away by it watching it in the theater. Then I saw it again. I was like, wow, yeah, it's cool. I remember that, but it wasn't as surprising. So I do think I watched it twice and then never watched it again until this viewing. And honestly, I thought maybe I'd be a little bored, but because I had given it so much time, I was again like, once I was in, I was like, oh, I forgot how bonkers this movie is. You know, I loved it. I mean, it was, so I really enjoyed rewatching it for this. And I'm a big fan of this movie.
Cool. I'm not going to talk about the original movies, which I love, because I'm going to try to convince you guys at some point to do the Road Warrior.
Yes.
I'll save my comments for that, whenever we do that in the future. But yeah, I was going to say, in recent memory, my reaction was a little different, maybe even to both of you, because I felt like this was, in recent memory, one of the movies that I felt like my entire friend circle and community that surrounded me was so fucking pumped.
I think
when a
I
movie
saw,
came
by the
out.
way, Bob, I think I saw this maybe with
You might have,
because
you might have seen a preview
I
screening.
remember
with me.
Kevin Perkins' reaction to like the guitar guy. And
Yeah,
he was
yeah,
just
yeah.
laughing his ass off at the guitar guy.
We probably saw it together, but
Yeah.
I saw this in the theaters at least 5 times. Like, I mean, I saw it a lot. So I might have saw it the first time with you, Jamie. But I saw the regular version like 4 times, and I saw the black and white version. I mean, like, I saw this movie a lot, but everyone surrounding me in my life at that time, the hundreds of friends in the Baltimore theater and movie community, it just felt like everyone was like, Fury Road. You know what I mean? Like, everyone was so pumped about this movie. Like, even in our house at the time, I had like 3 roommates. I think every one of us had like a Fury Road poster on a wall. Like, everyone was that pumped about that movie. It was like a revelatory as far as that. It was it just felt like a moment in time, you know, like probably how like Batman 1989 felt when that came out, you know, like when people were just losing, like, this thing exists and we can't believe it, you know, and we're just such huge fans. But of course, I mean, if I say that, do I need to say that much more? I love it. I actually, because I saw Furiosa, I wanted to rewatch the entire Mad Max saga just because I love them. And I ended up watching Fury Road twice 2 weeks ago without knowing we were doing this. So I watched Fury Road twice of my own choice, not by force, and then had to watch it again for this. And you know what? Every time I paid full attention. like I did, it wasn't even hard. And everyone who listens to this show knows that I can be a real big baby when I have to watch some of the movies we do. I'll be like the Christopher Nolan movies to watch those.
We know too.
Yeah, right. right. I'm like,
don't make me watch this again.
Don't make me watch this twice in a row for this fucking show, you know. But for this, I voluntarily essentially watched it 3 times, and I was like, I could probably do it again if I really wanted to. Like, it's not hard. I think it's maybe. I mean, I have so much to say. Well, I'll save that for the talking points, but it's maybe the greatest example of my favorite type of filmmaking, which is just show don't tell. I'm trying to think of a better example of show don't tell, but this is like maybe top 3, maybe the top ever. I don't fucking know. Also something that the 3 of us probably won't talk too much about because we're all 3 of us are middle-aged white dudes, but it is one of maybe the most notable feminist action movies of all time. And there's plenty of people who have spoken much more detail on that and have better credentials about it, but it's pretty awesome in those regards too. And it's just, I don't know, it's just a movie I deeply love, and obviously I can watch it 3 times and not even get bored. So that's the best review. If you can watch a movie 3 times within 2 weeks and not get bored, you did something right. I don't know. Yeah, so that's everything I got. Jamie, who wrote this shit?
Yeah, George Miller wrote this with Brendan McCarthy, who we'll talk about in a second, and Nick Lathoris. And from what we can tell, George and Nick they worked on Furiosa as well.
Mhm.
So they obviously. One thing I wanted to say about George Miller in this: how old was he when he made this movie? Because this does not
70.
feel like the work of an older filmmaker. You know what I
No,
mean? This
well,
feels like
I was
the
gonna
work
say,
of a 20-something nut
uh,
job.
me and Jamie saw it with our friend Kevin Perkins, and I remember at that screening, it was like there was a whole sense of like the old man showing the young kids how it's done
Yeah,
when this movie came out, and like all of us talking after the movie, like that was kind of the vibe going there.
it's so weird to think. Like, I can't think of a movie made by somebody over 70 that was this wild and crazy and untamed. You know, I'm sure
It
there
feels
is
like
one.
it's a 25-year-old filmmaker
It
making this
does.
movie.
It does. Like,
Yeah.
and that really stuck out to me. Like, because a lot of times, like when you see Spielberg's movies these days, and I still think Spielberg's a great filmmaker. They feel a little different than maybe Temple of Doom or something like that, or whatever. I don't know. They just feel a little different. I don't know. I guess
The negatives of Ready Player One aside,
yeah,
that
yeah,
at least felt like he was a little bit of a reaching into
yeah.
his younger
That
days.
had some of the mistakes of a younger filmmaker, I think.
Right. Yeah.
Which is kind of what I'm talking about in some ways. But anyway, this movie, it just boggles my mind that like it kind of gives me hope. Maybe when I'm
So
70, I'll make a movie like this.
Yes, it's inspiring for sure.
yeah.
so he's 79 right now. So I would say around 68,
So, yeah.
69, somewhere in there.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so this movie notoriously, and I read the book, there's a whole book on the making of this movie. And I was saying, I can't remember any of it. I read it like 5-6 years ago. But the one thing notorious about this movie was that they storyboarded the whole thing for, as opposed to writing the screenplay. I guess did it have a screenplay too, or did it just have
Yeah,
storyboards?
I
Yeah, it
just
does.
sent. Yeah, there's 500 pages of a script mint.
That's right.
I mean, it's honestly, it's a script.
Yeah.
It's just got all the storyboards in it.
It's
It
got,
is a
yeah.
script with
It's 500
storyboards.
pages because it's photos, right?
Yes,
Right.
it's
Okay.
drawings. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and if I also remember correctly, the writing of this spanned many, many years. Like he tried to get this made many years with
Well,
Mel Gibson and stuff like that.
because
as well.
he abandoned the franchise after the production problems of Beyond Thunderdome, and he said he was never going to do it again. And then but obviously this was something that was gnawing on him for decades, right? And it shows. Like when you work on something for that long, it shows.
Right. And the interesting thing is Brendan McCarthy is the storyboard artist, and he's getting a writer credit on this because that was their process, is they literally went in and wrote things. And
That's pretty rare, right? Like
the only thing I can think of that's even close is animated films. They storyboard those, like they have story passes where they pretty much just storyboard them, and that's when kind of a lot of the gags come and a lot of the comedy, which probably is kind of what happened here. You could almost imagine, and I'm not saying this happened, but you can almost imagine George coming up with a high level story, but then when they get into like, okay, what's this set piece going to look like? And that's when the guy comes in and says, okay, well, he gets shot in the hand with an arrow and then he smashes it against the door and it pops out. And, he does all those little details. That's kind of what happens in animation a lot, where the animators storyboard all those kind of little moments, those little fun moments. And that's
they
kind of what
they get credit for that. They might get credit for that.
They do. The thing about animation that's different is some animated films have like 40 writers, or they give other credits like story designer or something like that, because
Right.
they're not union, so they're allowed to do whatever they want. They could say, this is our secret weapon. That could be his credit if they wanted to, and there's no union to say, you can't do that.
That'd be an awesome credit to have.
Yeah, secret weapon. Yeah,
I think I've asked for it on a couple projects. They were like, "Hey, what kind of credit you want?" I was like, "Say secret weapon." So I don't know exactly the WGA layout of this. Like, there's part of me that says George Miller must be in the WGA. Then this is an Australian movie, maybe. I don't really know how it all plays out, like how a guy like that gets, or maybe they just kind of looped him into the script and put pictures in it, and you know what I mean. It could have been that they just kind of looped him in. But anyway, pretty rare, pretty interesting development. Um,
And the movie
yeah,
functions a little like an animated movie with
it does.
right. I mean,
It's funny on this rewatch, maybe because that screening I saw with you, Bob, years
yeah.
ago. Did we see that in 3D? Do you know? Did it have?
It
Do we have
was
glasses?
3D. It was
Yeah.
3D.
So maybe for
Yeah.
whatever reason it stood out to me, all the little animated and blue and kind of green screeny composite shots when I rewatched it this time. Whereas I remember it being almost more practical than it was. And I mean there's a ton of practical stuff in this.
There is, yeah.
But there were a lot more other stuff in it than I remembered. And I think maybe because I was just in the 3D, mode at the time, and it was like it kind of
And it was 3D of 10 years ago.
yeah,
you
yeah,
know, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, there's tons of CGI in this movie, and I get tired of hearing people being like, it's the most practical thing ever. Like,
Yeah,
no,
right.
there's tons of CG. Stop with this. It's a bad narrative.
It's funny because I didn't really remember it. And it looks fine. I mean, it's very stylized and the colors and all that stuff. It looks great. I mean, it just is what it is. It's this wild and crazy movie that he threw everything at. So it's all good.
Do you guys want to talk about the off-screen movie? We've mentioned this a few times on the show.
Yes,
sure.
This is mine, and I wanted to kind of compare it to I get a lot of epic scripts that are the amateur wrong way approach to what Fury Road does and George Miller of a several decades career does right. Jamie, do you want to set up what the off-screen movie is?
Sure. So Terry Rossio article on the Wordplay website. Is it Word? I always forget. I've only been going there for 30 years. Word Player website. It was funny. I second guessed myself. I was like, it's Word Player, but I'm going to say Word Play. On the wordplayer.com website, one of his columns, probably written 20 years ago, he talks about a thing called the off-screen movie. And it's kind of this theory that all those things that happen off screen that you could almost make a movie out of, like all this story that's happening off screen, the more interesting those things are, the better the movie. In some ways, was his theory. Like if you have a movie where everything takes place on screen, his theory was it's not as fun of a movie. But if there's a movie has a lot of stuff that takes place in this kind of off screen movie, then usually the movie's more interesting. And I don't know, I haven't tested this theory myself, but especially in a world building thing like this, something I've always preached for high concepts is big world, small window, which is the idea is kind of Terminator is always my example of that. So it's hard to sell as a spec screenwriter, a $200 million movie or a $300 million movie, which is what they want and what they make, right? But they don't make that from me. They make it from, the fifth Mad Max movie. They don't, or whatever, or the next Fast and the Furious fourth, or I was going to the next one.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah, you're right. You're right.
So they, that's where they're looking to spend $200 million, not on the scripts that come from us that are brand new and original, unfortunately, better or worse. I wish they would. They used to make big movies out of like original screenplays. They just don't do it too much anymore. But anyway, so what I think is a good strategy is to come up with a small window into a huge world. So maybe this is the first movie. This is the Mad Max of the series. That doesn't cost a lot of money. But then maybe once you kind of prove yourself and prove how interesting the story is and the characters and all that, then maybe the next one is $200 million or something like that. And Terminator would be an example. We have this huge war, basically, of machines versus mankind going on in the future. And it could be an enormous epic of a movie that they eventually made, and it wasn't as interesting as the first movie, which is just like one man, one killer robot chasing a woman in modern day, and that's a small window into a much bigger mythology, a much bigger world. So anyway, that's kind of two concepts.
Yeah,
there.
no, that's
go ahead.
The reason that I brought it up is, Jamie, I think these are two concepts, but you've introduced big window, big world, small window. And ever since then, I think they go hand in hand. I think the off-screen movie is speaking to the window that's not on screen.
Right.
And Bob, what was it that you were going to say?
Oh, I was going to say, because you told me to mention it, the only time we'll mention it during this episode, because this is only about Fury Road, but the off-screen movie in this case is literally in theaters as we speak.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so divisive. Some people love it. Some people hate it. I have seen it. I'll save my opinion for some other time, but I did like it. But it is literally the treatment you write up until the story you're going to actually film. And that's why I think it's so divisive for some people, because that movie doesn't feel like it has as much of an off-screen movie. Because that is Furiosa is the off-screen movie.
Yeah.
And that is a big window in a big world, more so than this is the small window, big world. So that's why I think it's so divisive. With some people love it, some people hate it, but it's interesting. We never have, whenever we talked about this, to have the off-screen movie was actually filmed is so odd. So it exists. Like, if you ever want to be like, what are they talking about? See Furiosa. That's the off-screen movie of Fury Road. It literally leads up to Fury Road, like right up to it. So there you go. Like it's the material. Yeah.
It's interesting how much more exposition I didn't put it on the talking points anywhere, but I think this movie is a great, to your point of show don't tell, Bob.
Yeah.
This movie is a great lesson in the power of withholding information as much as possible. Like, the more information you can get away with withholding,
the more the audience can build in their mind.
For the audience, the more we pay attention to what we are given and form our own opinions of this world and form our own, dreams and imagination about that off-screen world.
It's the Clone Wars thing, right? Like, Clone Wars being mentioned in A New Hope. As a kid, I was like, the Clone Wars must have been the most awesome thing you could ever imagine. And then we saw the Clone Wars. It's like, oh, that's what he meant? You could never film the thing in my head of what the Clone Wars were, And
okay. So I'm just going to really breeze through something I've talked about at length in other episodes. So if you're listening and you like these topics, the bigger version of this is in the Dungeons and Dragons episode and in the Willow episode. Also, one last thing, the quote that I love from Ted Elliott, which is on Word Player. Ted Elliott is the co-writer with Terry Rossio on a lot of famous movies, including Pirates of the Caribbean, Aladdin, Shrek, lots of great movies, great scripts. Ted Elliott says, the way to make a boring movie is to show us everything. And so one of the most, I get sent a lot of amateur epics. So like they're trying to write their own Mad Max, and they just have a mountain of ideas, and most of the problems come down to big world, big window. The windows are way too big, and so it's just an information overload. And I wanted to compare like the common pain points to these amateur epics to what Mad Max does in contrast, and why it works so well. So first one is the geographical window is usually too big. There's like 7 to 8 warring factions that span multiple continents, multiple oceans, and in the case of sci-fi movies, multiple planets. So I'm reading a script that has like 7 planets with 7 different empires battling, and I can't even remember the second planet, and 50 to 70 locations. I am having to just make a location dictionary just to keep up, which I do. And then I give it to the client and say, look how many locations you have. That's the producer hat in me. In contrast, Mad Max Fury Road's geographical window, it's like the Citadel and the surrounding wastelands.
Gas Town.
Yeah, it's like the desert, the muddy desert.
The canyon people.
The canyons. It's like, you don't have to go like, I don't know what's happening. I don't know where I am. The geographical window, even though it looks big, it's actually very small from an audience standpoint. We don't have to do a lot of thinking to keep up with the geographical window.
There's 4 encampments essentially.
Yeah,
And the green place, but the supposed green place.
Yeah, it's like the bullet farmers and the
Bullet Farm,
yeah.
Gastown, Citadel, the Canyon, and then the old lady green place.
Yeah.
Right.
The second problem is the character window is way too big. So I always use the example of old man number 3 in the wizard movie. Watch out for that dragon. I am reading so many scripts that have old man number 8, old man number 19. I read scripts that have like 50 to 60 featured extras. Like they all have lines. My most extreme example that I use is I read a script that was 300 pages, not a novel, a screenplay, and it had 118 speaking roles and 82 featured extras, all with dialogue.
I hope they can afford to feed all those people.
So like from a budget standpoint, if you're listening as a writer and you have a script that's kind of like that, you got to think like every single one of those characters, it needs, because they have a speaking role, their day rate is higher. They're gonna have they all need to have a costume. They all need to have meals. They all need to be scheduled. They're all gonna have food allergies and all this other crazy
You're gonna
stuff.
need lots of toilets.
There's gonna be COVID compliance and So in comparison, and this is kind of a large character window, but just think about it for a second. All the extras we see on screen. So I tracked it. I did the book report. Total in the movie, there are 18 characters with names who speak. 18 total in the whole movie, and then in featured extras, in all the war boys, all the scavengers, all the random bikers, all the everything, featured extras total, there are 15 featured extras. And we're talking the guy who looks up at the water and says, "Here it comes."
Right.
That guy gets paid extra because he has a line. 5 of those 15 featured extras come in the last minute when Immortan Joe's dead. You have all these random people. Immortan Joe is dead. Lift them up. There's like 5 of those. So the rest of the movie, there's only 11 extras that say anything. So total in Mad Max Fury Road, you have 34 people speaking total. So if you're out there and you got a script with like 50 speaking roles, how can you consolidate the cast? How can you combine old man number 2 and old man number 9 to be one old man and maybe give him a name? The actor will appreciate it. And then the third one is mythology overload. And this is where I think Fury Road really shines. Now, granted, they have 3 movies of mythology that lots of the audience is bringing in, so they don't really have to do that work. But
you could argue this was acts like a reboot, though. A lot of people I know that love this movie have not seen those. I have a friend who's this is their favorite movie of all time who hasn't seen the original 3.
Shit!
So like it works without bringing
that.
It
is, man.
Yeah, it works
self-contained.
It works without bringing those with
it. That's the goal. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so like basically, to put simply, it's prophecies on top of prophecies on top of prophecies on top of prophecies. Now, this could be sci-fi, this could be fantasy, this could be historic, but I am reading all these amateur scripts that are trying to do what Mad Max does, and we've got 3 to 5 prophecies in the movie to keep up with. This one has 1, and it's barely a prophecy, which is the green place. Like it's like a prophesized, between them, they think it's this place of magical salvation, right? Like they don't know if it really exists. They think it does. Furiosa swears she came from there, but we don't really know. And it feels like it functions like a prophecy, So 1 prophecy, amazing. So I love how small the window is, considering how big the movie feels.
It's also just small time wise.
Yeah.
It's not taking place over centuries or anything like that.
A couple days, maybe.
It's like a couple days, maybe 3 days.
That's
3 days.
That's a whole topic onto itself, right? Like
the
longer period of time the story takes place, the less urgency there is. So
The small window. Just
Why
feels
now?
yeah. Yeah. The why now of it all.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's talk about one of the biggest things: how to keep action scenes from getting redundant for a movie that is an action scene.
Yeah, it's one long action scene, and in some ways, or one continuous series of action scenes, and they're all related to cars and car chasing and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And how do you keep those from getting redundant? And there's a thing I used to do. I don't do this as much. I think because I naturally do it more than I used to. When I used to do my outlines, I used to always have one section. So I do an outline. I'd say, what's the scene? I'd have a checkbox for conflict, like what's the conflict? Then I'd have another box that said, how does it move the scene forward? What's the cause effect? And I used to have one extra box, and it was what's cool about the scene. Like why do I think the scene is cool or something like that? And then that kind of transformed into something else for my wrestling fandom. In wrestling, when I used to go to the Baltimore Civic Center and see Rowdy Roddy Piper fight the Tonga Kid and Jimmy Snuka or whoever it was usually Paul Orndorff. It was Paul Orndorff and Rowdy Roddy Piper versus the Tonga Kid and Jimmy Snuka. They had this every month. They would have this long ongoing feud, and it would
You're
just
dating
escalate,
yourself here,
escalate.
Jamie.
Yes, and
That's
and
fine.
and usually what they in wrestling terms they call it the blow off match was always a gimmick match. It was a Texas tornado match. It was a cage match. It was something that was the blow off. The blow off was always something weird. It was, and the term for the what's cool about it, I would always put what's the gimmick? What's the gimmick of this scene? And I think that's the key to keeping action scenes fresh. Is figuring out the gimmick, because we've all seen a car chase, we've all seen a fight scene. So the gimmick is like Captain America fighting in an elevator, right? That's a gimmick. It's the elevator match, or something like that. And
Yes.
I think that's what you need to do with these action scenes. Now, I'll be honest. I think this works beyond action scenes. I think it works in dialogue scenes. I think you can say, "What's the gimmick?" What is? Maybe they're battling about who gets the last lean cuisine meal in the refrigerator or something, and that's the gimmick. I don't know what it is.
Maybe they're talking about a Twinkie.
They're talking about
Yep.
a Twinkie.
Right.
So I think what's the gimmick is a good question to ask for scenes in general. But just to give an example, because this movie does this so well, the gimmick, like there's one particular fight scene, and just chaining him to the war boy, to have a fight scene is a gimmick. That's a gimmick in that fight scene that happens early on. You
mean chaining him to the front of the car is what you mean?
That's that part.
Chaining him to
chaining him to okay,
nuts.
gotcha.
Yeah.
To Nux. Yeah, just when they're chained together in that fight scene, it creates a whole new dynamic to a fight scene. And all these gags that a storyboarder can then go in and figure out, like, okay, he almost gets it, but then the guy pulls him back, or they use the chain to trip Furiosa, or they do there's all these different things that they can use with that gimmick. The polecat scene obviously is a great gimmick, that something like we've never seen before. Just saying, using a kind of rig as a fortress, kind of like the Pirates kind of version of it's almost like a pirate chase kind of movie or a pirate attack where they're trying to raid a rig that kind of is a moving fortress.
Yeah.
It just kind of is a siege movie that's taking place at 80 miles an hour,
Yes.
or something like that.
Love that description.
Yeah, it's great. It's
yeah,
great.
I mean, and all these things are just gimmicks. They just you can see where they're sitting there saying, okay, we can't just have an ordinary chase. We already did banging the car into the other car and cars flipping and cars exploding. The sandstorm, another, great gimmick in some ways. There's just so many good things.
The rotary blades.
The rotary blades.
Yeah.
Just introducing some kind of gimmick, think of it in terms of, again, my 10-year-old self waiting for the cage match or the one where they use fire or something, or the tables and chairs, which they do in wrestling all the time. How do you add a gimmick to these action scenes to make it just seem fun. Like that's
The
your
one where
next step.
Max is leaping from car to car, damaging everything. You know what I mean? Like
Yep.
that's even a gimmick itself,
I
right?
love that.
Even that. And I really think that's the key to making these things fresh, especially if you have, John Wick kind of has to do this too, because they have a lot of gun battles. So it's like, what's the gimmick? What's different about this fight that we haven't seen in the last 3 fights we just watched? So anyway, that's the one thing I wanted to note from the action scenes here.
Yeah, you made me think. I have some to add because you made me think. You made me challenge myself to be like, what is the answer to this question? This is a big one. And it made me watch the movie from that lens. Because I didn't watch it until you had this talking point. And some of the other things that I think is cool that this movie does, is every single, beyond the gimmick within those individual scenes, every single scene does a lot of things different every scene. Like there's unforeseen obstacles, like the sneezing pregnant woman revealing that Furiosa is not alone, and then all the bikers are like pissed,
Yeah, right.
The war rig gets stuck in the mud. The harpoons and plows slow them down. Every scene has like a different kind of deadline. One deadline is the warlords are coming. Another deadline is the storm is coming. Another deadline is the engine is overheating. Another deadline is a character is literally losing blood. So like every scene has its own like ticking clock within
the war rig is on fire.
The war rig is on
And
fire.
they have to put it out, right?
Yep.
There's a term I saw recently that takes a familiar term and gives it like personifies it, which is stakeholder. I really like that term. And I feel like every scene has every one of these action scenes, they highlight a different stakeholder, like a different person. The stakes are escalated for that character specifically. Whereas in the next scene, it might be Max, whose survival is at most stake. And then the next scene, it might be Furiosa, but they mix it up and every action scene feels fresh because of that. And then another on the other end of the coin, every action scene, it sort of feels like a different person is forced to be the leader. So like one time, one of the wives will have to reload the gun and it's all up to her. And then another time, another one of the wives will have to like put her life in danger to save them. And then Nux has got to put his life in danger to save them all. In every scene, in every action scene, somebody else is sort of taking the lead, which I think is also another way that keeps it fresh. And then my favorite one is I have a new codification to bring to the table. So stakeholder, but another one. I didn't even hear this through screenwriting. I just heard a friend talking about like life, and they were saying how they were having a civil war with their friend. And I was like, oh shit, that is a great way to codify like internal antagonism. Like you, even whether it's a comedy or a drama, you need to find a way to make your scenes be a civil war within like friendly confines. And I feel like what this movie excels at more than anything is every scene is just every single character is an untrustworthy ally to each other. Like you are in every scene, there's tension for you feeling like, I hope this person doesn't let our hero down or betray them. Like, will Nux betray the team? Will Max betray the team? Will Furiosa betray Max? Will one of the women betray the team? Will one of the war boys betray Joe and try to kill the women, which puts our whole team at risk? Will one of the warlords betray Joe and try to kill the women, which puts our team at risk? There's that great line. We don't want to shoot the wives, sir. He says, just probing. Right. That makes you go, oh shit, like the whole team, the whole warlords might attack and say, fuck you, Joe. So anyway, that civil war that exists within each one of these action scenes is really palpable. It creates a lot of tension. It makes them extra exciting because you don't even know whether they're going to be on the same side during the duration of the scene. I mean, the wives are trying to run away. Like, it's great.
Yeah, and it's in the construction of the franchise itself. Everyone is technically, you're always out for yourself unless something else matters. You're only in it with other people to survive, you know? So the tension just builds and builds and builds. And Miller knows what he's doing in this movie, maybe more than even the originals, because he's done it 3 times.
He's done it,
He's done it, right?
And made Happy Feet and...
Yeah, well, yeah. Babe 2 and everything.
Babe
Yeah.
2.
Right. He knows, man. He knows. Now, one of my favorite things is like just the opening when Furiosa is first thought to be still on Morton Joe's side, and the war boy keeps talking to her and assuming that she's doing his bidding.
Mhm.
Just the tension of like, when does he figure out that these orders are not Joe's?
Right.
Just that. It's almost not, and they were kind of passive scenes, really.
Yeah.
Him just
He
being
j-
like, "What
he
are we
just
doing now,
keep
boss?"
chiming
You know?
in. Yeah. He's like
Yeah.
optimistic.
When does
Yeah.
that guy figure it out?
Yeah,
And then when he does, it's the explosion of that moment.
That's a perfect example.
Yeah. Is that everything you had on that?
Yeah, Jamie
good.
inspired me.
It's good.
Hell yeah. I was gonna say you could also maybe call this like the blank scene exercise. Like, like when you talk about a movie, like, hey, dude, you remember the Twinkie scene? You know what I mean?
Well,
Like, if you can give it a name,
yeah,
then you did something right.
that's a cool idea. The one thing, I mean, leaving off like two of the things we talk about all the time, which I won't talk about here, but you can listen to other episodes. A lot of this has to do with premise delivery and premise paint.
Sure.
That's a way to keep it fresh as well. And then we have many episodes that we talk about premise paint. You could probably find previous episode. And the other thing is good news, bad news. I mean,
Yeah.
a lot
It's
of it.
funny that we didn't do good news, bad news for this.
It's all
but
over
fine.
the place. I mean, this might be
Yeah.
the ultimate good news, bad news.
Yeah. The
But
whole thing is from
It's
start
good news.
to finish.
Yeah.
There's so many episodes we've done good news, bad news. I was like, we won't do it again.
No, you know what I almost challenged us to do, because I think that maybe we'll do it another time. We'll do it for the Road Warrior episode and bring back this scene. That scene, Jamie, that you mentioned with Nux is asleep, and then the water, Max discovers the wives, and all of them are against each other. Nux, Max, and Furiosa and the wives are three divided different, teams at that point. And so every moment is actually like good news for Furiosa, bad news for Max, good news for Hux. It's very interesting, and it's like it makes it watching that scene so like such a unique experience. Like where I'm like, I think I want Max to do good at this part. I'm not sure. Is he gonna kill Furiosa? Like maybe this is bad news. Like it's very interesting. Like is it good news? Is it bad news? It's good news for somebody. It's very interesting scene from a good news, bad news standpoint. So it would be fun to figure out.
It makes you question who you should be rooting for.
Yes,
in a good way, not in a bad way, in a good way. Yeah,
like when he's drinking the water, it's so good because you're like, oh, he needs the water to survive, and the water's splashing on Hux's face and it's waking him up, and you're like, oh shit, like
don't wake him up. Yeah,
it's so good. It's just the splash of water. Yeah.
No, it's good crap. Yeah, it's funny we didn't do good news, bad news. I thought about that this morning. I was like, of all the movies not to do, but you can pretty much go back throughout the show and find plenty of that. And
yeah.
This is actually a daunting task to track the good news, bad news, like you just said. I don't know if I'd want to do it. It's so intricate. Okay, let's talk about villain construction.
Bob, do you want to set up why this is on there? You don't have to say who.
What do you mean? You want me to? No, you do it. You do it.
Yeah, well, one of our regular
I'll talk about Morton Joe.
Yeah, one of our regular listeners wanted us to go deep.
Oh, that's what you mean.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Oh yeah, we had a regular listener. His name is Michael. I don't know if we're saying last names.
Hi, Michael.
Hi, Michael. And he asked that we talk about what makes a great villain. And I responded, well, we kind of do that with the action figure exercise. So that's why we're covering the action figure exercise for a
Well, we've
Joe,
done it.
Right?
We've done it. We've done it 53 times, Mike.
Yeah. Yeah, we've done it a lot already, but whatever. We're gonna do it again.
But not the action figure. We've only done the action figure for a villain once.
Yeah.
So,
well, my response was just action figure exercise seems like that kind of fits the bill, but whatever. We've talked about villains several times.
Yes.
But thank you for requesting.
I think it's great.
Yeah. But do you want to get into the action figure exercise?
Yeah. I'll start. Yeah. So the action figure exercise is a quick little tool I came up with for my clients because I am constantly check your bingo cards. I read amateur scripts 5 days a week. And I am constantly reading scripts where there is zero visual information on the page about any character. I mean, nothing. I don't know what they look like, how tall they are, how short they are, you name it. And a lot of this comes from there's a side of the screenwriting community that is has been made to be afraid to describe a character because of representation worries with casting and things. And I representation is crucial, but your handling of that shouldn't come at the expense where I'm reading an entire script and I don't know what anyone looks like ever. It makes for a very strange read and frustrating read. And
they're just all like blobs of flesh.
For instance, it would say a Morton Joe 30s or 50s, right. And that's it. Like you'd be shocked how often I just read like Jimmy George 43. That's all I get.
You're reading it, and a Morton Joe looks like Jamie. You're just like, okay.
Well, like, and what we did in the Vader episode, and I didn't pull this from the storyboard thing. I should have script, but maybe it's in there, maybe it's not. But what we did on the Star Wars episode is we read this paragraph in George Lucas's script that describes Vader, and it sounds exactly like what you would picture for Darth Vader. That's why he pops off the screen. It is the writer's job to visualize the character. It's not the costume designer's job. It's not the casting director's job. It's your job to cast your movie on the page. It's your job to create the costume on the page. And then they execute it with their expertise beyond what you describe. So
they
very
can change it if they have to.
They can change it. They always do. And that's fine.
Yeah.
But you got to give us you got to show us who these people are. Like, imagine if we didn't know Invictus was like fucking huge beast of a man, and it's just like says like Rictus, sorry. Invictus.
Rictus
maybe I got Invictus.
Rictus Erectus is his name.
Imagine if you didn't know his stature, right? Like you can't imagine him in a battle and see how he has the dominant physical
him ripping an engine out of a moving vehicle.
That's not going to work if you don't describe him as a physically dominating person.
Right.
So anyway, this exercise I've given to clients who just give me those blank characters because I challenge them to figure out what their character looks like and also how you can make it specific to the movie. And it also is a great brainstorm technique. So here we go. The things I asked them to figure out is, what is their unique physical appearance? This is less about being hot or sexy. This is about physicality and their physical contrast to other characters in the story that matters. Their costume. What clothes are in your character's closet during the course of the movie? Brainstorming their costumes can often give you scenes like Speeder Luke, Snow Luke, Desert Luke costume. I mean, Star Wars again it immediately comes to mind. But you might have your character might have three or four costumes in their closet during the movie. They might have 3 or 4 different iterations of their action figure, and that'll help you come up with ideas for their scenes. Accessories. What things best represent your character, and can you make those things premise specific? Like what accessories are going to be in the box. And we've talked about when we did the Princess Bride action figure exercise, and we just did it without even looking. And then while we were on the episode, clicked on the actual action figures, and they had all the accessories and stuff. Like, scars, birthmarks, tattoos, or stains that are specific to your story. Does your character have any scars or birthmarks or tattoos that represent them? And can you make them premise specific? Did they experience anything that created stains on them that the action figure would, of course, have, whether that's mud or blood or whatever? Pull string quotes or catchphrases. Do they have any signature catchphrases or lines that you would pull their doll or push the button and they would say that encapsulate who the character is? And in Indiana Jones, we did, it's not the years, honey, it's the mileage. I hate snakes, Jock. I hate them. Like, it's a very easy way when you challenge yourself to do this to kind of challenge yourself to find your character's voice through this action figure exercise. So it's something that it's a tool that I give out a lot, and we've had a lot of fun on this show doing it, and I thought it would be good to bring up Bob thought it would be good to show how Morton Joe it makes such a great character because of this. Yeah.
I did 3 people. So
I'd say go for it.
Oh yeah, I did a Morton Joe, Furiosa, and Nux. So like a Morton Joe, this is like the kind of things you would write, like Jimmy was just explaining. Morton Joe, physical appearance: large, tall, long white hair, thick, giant eyes. He's a portly man, right?
Yeah.
His costume: clear plastic military decorated chest plate, back plate, skull face mask, breathing apparatus, and a war painted face, right? Accessories: extremely large metallic citadel symbol that hooks to his belt buckle. He doesn't really have a specific weapon per se in the movie, but
he has a revolver in he
does have a revolver.
Car, yeah,
he does have a revolver. And I wrote actually because I was like, are accessories in this movie, do you think the cars, if they're specific to the thing?
Well, like part of an extension of the exercise that I didn't talk about is vehicles, like
vehicles and stuff.
You want to brainstorm your 8-figure set.
Right,
and then
right.
You want to do the
vehicles.
expansion pack that includes the vehicles and the dioramas.
So, yeah. So in this case, and Morton Joe has a specific car in the movie. It's a double-decker 1950s warmobile. Is the best way I could.
Hell yeah!
It's a 1950s station wagon. There's probably a more direct answer for that, but I don't know what to call that, but it was like a double-decker 1950s station wagon warmobile. Scars, birthmarks, tattoo stains. His torso is covered in legions and scars and growths, obviously, which is premise specific because they're living in a post-apocalyptic radiation dystopia, right? So, perfect. Pull string catchphrases: I am your redeemer. It is by my hand you will rise from the ashes of this world. That's my child, my property. Do not, my friends, become addicted to water. You will ride eternal, shiny and chrome. And one of my favorite ones is mediocre. I love that one. I love when he screams that. For Furiosa, physical appearance: tall, one-armed, shaved head, very athletic build, straightforward. Costume: brown dirty tank top, dark pants, tactical boots. Accessories: basically the robotic prosthetic left arm shoulder rig that kind of goes over her entire torso, right?
Yeah.
Like that's pretty much her thing. And she's
that's
got
all she needs, man.
Yeah, and you could also include her mini crossbow thing that she has, right? Yeah. Scars, birthmarks, tattoos, black oil stained forehead, and mark of the Citadel branded on the back of her neck. Pull string quotes, catchphrases: fool, remember me, or that's not his blood. For Nux, physical appearance: bald, dark sunken eyes, entire body covered in a white powder. I don't know what to call that, but I assume it's some sort of white powder, right? Or it's mud, maybe. I don't know.
Maybe it's dried mud. Yeah,
dried mud, something like that. Costume: shirtless, tactical cargo pants and boots. He wears Max's jacket, but I want to.
I love that.
Yeah, that would be a Max. That would be a Max accessory.
Yeah.
Accessories for Nux: customized steering wheel and blood bag handcuff.
Yeah, man.
Right? Scars, birthmarks, tattoo stains, visible neck tumors with smiley faces drawn on, and the mark of the Citadel branded on his flesh. Pull string quotes and catchphrases: oh, what a day, what a lovely day. Witness me. I live, I die, I live again, and if I'm gonna die, I'm gonna die historic on the Fury Road. I mean, all this is like straight drawn. And what I love about doing this exercise for a Mad Max movie is people only have one costume in these movies, really. I mean, like, with very few exceptions in this whole franchise, you only get one set of clothes.
All you need. Yeah.
It's like a Western. You only get one set of clothes. No one has a wardrobe. You have your look, your one singular look. So this is like perfect for this franchise.
Yeah. And I think this shows how if you spend the time doing this exercise, it's impossible not to have a vivid, memorable character, and possibly you're going to come out of it with more than just the what the character looks like. You might come out with their persona. You might come out with ideas for scenes. You might start their own whiteboard just from this exercise. So I really love this exercise.
It's such storytelling. Like, just think about not knowing that they all have his symbol branded on their flesh. That tells the story right there.
Mhm.
You don't need to say it or anything. He views them as,
their property.
They're property of his. He's branded them just like a cow, right? So yeah, that's storytelling right there.
Yeah.
And strangely enough, like, when I was a kid, there was a tradition of like coming up with like He-Man characters before there was a story behind it, right? You just you're like, oh, this looks cool. We'll give him a sword. We'll do a thing. And then that inspired like the mythology behind He-Man that somebody later came and wrote the comic book for, or whatever. Transformers, whatever. Like people came up with the mythology and the storylines after they came up with the cool stuff. So you can kind of do that. At least in this case, you'd probably already have your world and your basics, but you can almost just play around with your action figure and then kind of inspire you to write the mythology.
If you want to write a movie about a guy who has angel wings and has like, a giant sword, but he is a mailman, start from there. You make his action figure and then write the script based on how did that guy get like that,
Yeah.
You guys want to talk about reverse rooting resume for the villain?
Yeah. No, actually, let's not.
Okay, forget it. Thanks. Hey,
I'll just say no. I'll just say no. I'll just say no. There'll be a new type, like pass. But it'll be like a game show. So the rooting resume is something that I have in the Save the Cat Writes for TV book. And it's basically an expansion of the Save the Cat idea, which is that if you have this kind of horrible person, as long as they save a cat or do something nice for someone, maybe we'll root for them. And I kind of expand that, and we've talked about this many times and checked a lot of boxes. My favorite version is the Joker episode, where you can see lots of different things that get us to root for a character all throughout usually the first 10 pages of a story when we first meet a character. And I have a whole checklist of things. But the other thing that we found is that, and this is just kind of as we go through, is that you can reverse these ideas and to set up a villain. You can actually use the same rooting resume concepts and almost check the boxes to set up a villain. So I'm just going to go through a couple for our pal Joe here, and we'll talk about him. So the major one in the rooting resume that stands out to me, the most important one I always feel, is that if you can make your character an underdog, people will naturally root for them. They'll just be like, oh, they have, the world is unjust to them. They have this huge road to kind of go through. We'll root for them. In a case with a villain, it's usually the opposite. They're kind of the overdogs, right?
The overdogs, yes.
No, the overcats. Make it a complete opposite.
They are at the top of the world, keeping everybody else down. They are literal opposite of the underdogs. Like there is nobody that is above them in a lot of villain cases, at least in Joe's case. Mm-hmm. So, he treats the world treats. Yeah, go for it.
I was going to say he withholds water from his people. He has subjugated women to breed.
Absolutely.
He has the Half-Life War Boys who has basically turned into religious zealots.
Yeah, he treats the world unjustly.
He treats the world unjustly.
Because I have things like in the rooting resume, like they don't get any respect. Well, he demands respect, or he'll kill
everyone bows to him. Yes.
Yeah. And then there's things like they're kind of a newbie trying to play a league up. You know what I mean? They're out of their league to an extent. Well, he's the guy defining the league. He is the ultimate big league guy. Sometimes it's lack of money or privilege, and he's obviously representing the opposite.
All of it.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then there's even things like physical ailments or kind of sickness, which he does kind of have.
He does. That's why I think it's interesting.
Yeah, he does kind of have those. But the key thing is with his, we're meant to look at him and go kind of, ew, as opposed to like, oh, I feel bad for him.
Right.
There's like a subtle way that they're portrayed as more grotesque.
Also, that's like world building, as in like there's no one that's not kind of sick here.
Everybody's
Like, everybody's sick.
Everybody's sick in some way.
Yeah.
And he's kind of using other people to keep himself alive and keep his, and all that kind of stuff. So another one is they care about someone or something. And while he cares about things, this is more like they care deeply, like more than themselves, kind of thing.
Well, I thought it was
empathetic.
interesting, Jamie. He cares deeply, but for the wrong reasons.
For the wrong reasons.
Yeah, they're his things and they're his legacy. It's only about him, right?
I think you'll find that. I think you'll find that with a lot of villains that they might check some of these boxes for the wrong reasons or use the things for the wrong things. So, even though he cares about them, he's kind of exploiting them, for what they can give them. And he kind of has a disregard for humanity in general. He's just like, they're all there to service him as opposed to empathetic reasons. It's like, how do they service him? And then another one is a lot of times they're dreamers and they seek something better. And I think he's kind of there to maintain the status quo and keep everybody under his rule. I think he's found his dream. So
also he has this weird hope where like the fact that he believes that a legacy in this world matters, you know what I mean?
Right.
Like, he actually cares about the Citadel after he's dead. That's why he wants to have powerful kids.
Was it a male?
Right. That's what I'm saying. Is like he cares about what happens after he dies. That's a weird construct of this whole format.
Yeah.
Yep. It's like the kind of mispurposed dream that we don't necessarily buy into.
Right.
That's Jamie. That's a great way to put it.
Mispurposed dream. That's cool.
Yeah. It's just a weird thing. So, and though I have to say some heroes have those kind of dreams too.
Sure.
Yeah.
Like, what? What's up with that? So another rooting resume thing sometimes is just I call it they're fun, but it could be they're charming, they're sexy, whatever, they're funny, all those things. And he's definitely not charming per se, or anything in a normal sense. There's a humor to him, which is why we kind of love to hate him. There is something funny about him, I think.
He's cool looking.
Yeah, and he's kind of a cool, interesting character, but he's repulsive instead of attractive.
Right, totally.
But his repulsiveness is attractive as a movie watcher for a villain. It's interesting, like his repulsiveness.
But I love that it still checks this box, but in an inverted way.
Yeah. And then another one is that we know their struggle, and this is kind of like we kind of empathize with their problems and their pains and stuff. I don't know. I don't really empathize with any of his.
It's the opposite.
No, it's the total opposite.
Yeah, it's like all of his things are almost over the top, unempathetic. I mean, they're like purposefully built to make us kind of, not be empathetic at all, or kind of roll our eyes or sit in judgment of what he cares about. And a lot of times characters like this will make kind of vulnerable confessions. They'll show vulnerability. They'll show where they're human. And I don't think he really does it all. I mean, even
he's sort of sitting in the place of symbology of toxic masculinity that destroyed the world. So I don't think the movie really gives a crap about that.
Even the spots where you said like it was a boy or whatever, they're kind of ridiculous. Like they're not.
No, he's holding a woman like she's a thing.
Yeah,
and it's like it's just so symbolic of that.
And so some of the other things are we set up characters so we aspire to be like them. Obviously, he is kind of the opposite of that. I don't know. Maybe somebody in the audience aspires to be like.
They might aspire
to
have
want
his
to be
hair.
anything like a Morton Joe. Yeah,
maybe they'll be one of those hot takes like the Karate Kid a few years from now, where it's like Morton Joe was the good guy, something.
Ooh, man, I don't know, Jamie.
Somebody will do it.
I don't know.
It'll be out there.
That's rough.
He's the good guy. Let me show you why.
Although the internet is quite a terrible place, so I can't doubt that.
Funded by Don Jr.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Morton Joe was definitely the good guy, and this Furiosa Max ruined everything. So yeah,
that's really messed up.
Somebody will make that video. So we don't aspire to be anything like him. disloyal, he's manipulative, he's selfish, he's, everything. He just checks a bunch of boxes that most people probably don't want to be like. Some people may be like that. So, there's also a thing I have in there that's like they're the best at something. And I think he's the best at being the worst. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good. That's a good way to say it.
And
Which is
so it's not so much that he's the opposite, that he's not the best at something. I think he is the best at being whatever this horrible thing is. He's great at being horrible. So anyway, and in the beginning, he checks all of these boxes. There's just so many of them he checks, and there's probably even a few more he checks. He's kind of the anti-save the cat, anti-rooting resume. And it makes a lot of a fun villain and a very memorable villain as well.
I doubt we'll ever do the first Mad Max movie, but since it'd cool to think about if he did the reverse rooting resume on Toe Cutter from the first Mad Max movie, since it's the same actor. Like he's done this twice, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you could probably apply it. Almost all the things you said, I think apply the same way.
what I love about doing this, Jamie, is every single time we do a great iconic villain, they check every one of those boxes in a very unique way. They either like are but doing it for the wrong reasons, or the complete opposite for every single category. Like we did Michael Myers, we did the Gremlins, we did Hannibal Lecter, we did Hans Gruber, and they're all doing the reverse. Like it's great.
It's interesting because there are a handful of characters, and this character might apply, that are kind of fun villains. You know what I mean? They are fun.
Yeah.
There's a funness to it. Like Hannibal Lecter is an evil person, but he's fun to watch, So they kind of are a mixed bag of the opposite of things we have. And it's like they're so starkly the opposite.
It's like
kind of fun.
Edging on silly, and
it's
that was
edging
what
on
makes
silly.
Like Immortan Joe is silly, but then again, Mad Max has an element of silliness to it in general.
The absurdity of it. Yes.
This character probably has like a comic blind obsession to him, which makes him funny. You know what I mean? There's almost that comic.
He's obsessed with power in every possible way to the point it's hilarious.
Himself, man.
And himself, it's hilarious.
It's kind of like if you put like a Danny McBride character as a villain, you know what I mean? Like as a complete villain. Because he kind of thinks he's the king.
This is the end.
Yeah,
Kenny Powers.
They did that.
Yeah,
this is the end. Yeah.
Kenny Powers.
That's true. Yeah,
I mean,
it's like he totally has bought into his press clippings and just believes like the comic book version of himself, and that's what he lives by.
God, sign me up for that. I would watch that. I would watch a Mad Max movie with Danny McBride as the villain in a heartbeat. All right, so still under villain construction. Let's talk about when society is the villain.
Yeah, this one's mine. So
Okay.
I think this is another example of a technique they're using that explains why we feel Immortan Joe is such a great villain, which is when something is wrong with society, when society is the villain, then you need to put faces on that. And all of the war boys, everything in the world that's on Immortan Joe's side is the many faces of the societal ill of the wasteland. But I think Immortan Joe is like the perfect example of how to put a face on the societal ill. Like he's a barbarian, warmongering, dictatorship, toxic masculine patriarchy. Like wrapped
he is
up.
The patriarchy.
Yeah, all wrapped up. I mean, to your point, Bob, we're not going to talk about feminism because we're not the right people to do that. But yeah, like he's the patriarchy of the wasteland.
I mean, it couldn't be more. It's hard not to talk about because it couldn't be more obvious. The stuff that's written in the woman's former jail cell, essentially, who destroyed the world. We're not things.
Yeah. Yes.
I mean, you don't even need to really say. The movie says everything that you need to have. Yeah.
I was thinking how this was like very similar to Barbie in that way.
Yeah.
I didn't know I was going to be comparing Barbie. Well, because when I was looking up when we've talked about putting a face on the societal ill, Barbie was one of the episodes we did this, and it's patriarchy is the societal ill. So,
who destroyed the world? Men.
Men.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is a great example. We talk about it in Legally Blonde, the many faces of the societal ill. They're placing limitations on what Elle can do because she's a blonde woman. And yeah, all sorts of other movies. So
Is that it? Is that the?
yeah, that's
okay.
it's a simple one, but
No,
it's
that's a good one. It's a good
it's
one.
a good.
Let's talk about the circus mirror.
So I put this on here because I'm not sure if it tracks, but I'm going to explain it and go through it, and then we can talk. So the circuit mirror. I love when Jamie says the quote, "We're the same, you and I." It's the notion. There's this. There's a screenwriter named Stanley Sawa, and he says, "Choose the objective that defines the choice of opponent. A villain is created once the hero's objective is chosen. Whoever would try to stop them getting what they want." So, she wants to save women from an evil from an evil patriarchy. Then Immortan Joe is born out of that. So some great examples are Raiders of the Lost Ark. If Indy makes the wrong choices, he becomes Belloc. In Star Wars, if Luke makes the wrong choices, he becomes Vader. In The Matrix, if Neo makes the wrong choices, he becomes Cypher. In Doctor Sleep, if Danny makes the wrong choices, he becomes Rose the Hat. They're very similar in their makeup. It's basically like whatever your hero's conflict is, you want to make the villain the embodiment of that. And I was wondering what you guys thought, whether it tracks here for any of the characters.
Yeah, I have a take on this that I almost put down, but it kind of goes a little bit into theme. So we'll have to kind of go into theme a little bit. So, and I can't even remember, I came across this guy's podcast. His name was like, I read the transcript, but I didn't listen to the podcast. Jake, I wish I knew the guy's name. Maybe I have it here in my notes. And he talked about how George writes all his stories. Like he said, George Miller said Babe or Happy Feet and all these other things were George struggling with his own desire to hope. That whole line that hope's a mistake, right?
Yeah.
So going off of that premise, I started to think about hope. Is that what this is? Is it, what does the end mean in regards to hope? And in some ways I thought maybe the message was hope is a mistake. Maybe you build your own hope. Like, I'm not sure if Max's flaw is hope, or is that he thinks hope's a mistake, or if actually he's kind of like the whole character and he teaches Furiosa that you don't just hope, you go and make the dream happen. So when they go back,
which he does say to her,
he does say, he does say it.
So when they go back, they make it happen. And in regards to that, Immortan Joe is a guy who doesn't hope, he makes the thing happen in some ways.
He's a real go-getter.
Yeah, he's a go-getter.
Yeah.
So sometimes I look at these themes, these character arcs, as a spectrum. And usually what happens is the hero's flaw, if taken to the extreme, is the villain character. But sometimes the spectrum can be a little different. Sometimes if you take the good thing, to an extreme, that can also be a vice. And I almost kind of looked at it that way, as like if you take it to the extreme and just keep doing everything you want, you're almost like a tumor in the world or something like that.
Yeah.
At the sake of everyone else. But if you're bringing everybody up with you, then it's something else. So anyway, I started to dance around like does Immortan Joe, because I don't think Immortan Joe is a person that hopes really. Like, I mean, maybe for this baby or legacy thing, but it doesn't seem like that's really what gets him going. I don't think he's somebody that wastes his time with hope. I just think he's like, I take, and I think in some ways, I think that might be the message of the movie, is like, don't sit around dreaming, just go do it, or something like that. I don't, it's not quite that either, because obviously Furiosa does do it. She takes action. Yeah. But it's funny because the change to get what she really wants is back home. It's not out there. You know what I mean? It's like, isn't there something along the lines of, they say, you got to fix the things. What I'm trying to
Yeah,
think.
what is the quote?
You
Oh
gotta
man,
fix the
where's my
things that
phone?
are broken. Was that it?
That's it. So
Or
instead,
they'll break you. It's something
or they'll
like
break
that.
you.
Or they'll break you.
So it's like
Right?
instead of running away to the next great green land, you got to go and confront the thing that's messing with you. Like that was somehow my takeaway, and I'm not sure how exactly that relates to Morton Joe, but I don't think he's somebody that goes to the next land. I think he just kind of he's constantly just changing the world around him to fit his own purpose.
Here's the quote, Jamie. Hope is a mistake. If you can't fix what's broken, you'll go insane.
That's it.
There you go.
Yeah. So I think she ends up, instead of, again, looking outward for hope, she looks inward for hope. She looks in the world she's in for hope.
Yes.
Now, what does that mean to a Morton Joe? I'm not exactly sure. But
how does that relate to this circus mirror technique? I'm not sure if it tracks in this way.
That's where what I was wrestling with. That's what I was wrestling with.
You could almost apply the circus mirror technique to Furiosa and Mad Max a little bit, right?
Yes, that's why I wanted to bring it up. It might still apply.
Like Furiosa is his circus mirror, but she did change her mind. Mm-hmm. She could have been, because Max could have easily done what she did, and then from Nux's standpoint, if the extreme of Nux is a Morton Joe, if his old way. So anyway, the circus mirror is just an exercise to get you. This isn't a clean cut one.
Yeah, no, it's not.
It's not.
I thought it would be, and then watched the movie, and it wasn't.
Yeah, right. You could argue that Max is so resourceful in this world, living through so much, that if he wanted to be like a Morton Joe, he probably could.
It's like he already had that opportunity. Yes.
Yeah, he has all the faculties in his own skill set and knowledge that he could probably do something like that, but instead he chooses to live a quiet, tortured life where he beats himself up about his failures, whereas Morton Joe will just mass murder people. He doesn't care. So there is sort of a little bit there. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, if I really, this might be stretching it a little bit, but if I really looked at it, instead of fixing things, Joe is creating this fantasy like for everybody to live in, and he lives in it as well, as opposed to helping people and fixing the problems, or something like
all of that. I feel all of that.
Yeah.
I could also say, like, if it does have continuity, so you could say that somebody like a Morton Joe, if he was in Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, he would have totally been like to all those kids, yes, I am your new Messiah.
Yeah.
And Max is the kind of guy that's like, I'm not him. I don't have anything to do with this. Like that's the circus mirror guys we're talking about. Joe would have seized all power instantly and been like, yes. Whereas it's
funny, as we're talking this, I just watched Dune 2, and now I'm like mixing like
all the too much sand, Jamie.
Like,
too much sand
and messiahs and religious fervor, and all,
We'll get to that later.
Yes,
yeah, we'll get to that later another time. Do you want to talk about the villain's plan?
Yeah. So the next part of a really good villain is they need a good plan. They need a simple plan. And we've talked about this ad nauseum on the show too. There's been plenty of examples. Sometimes the plan is confusing, and then therefore the villain feels less cool and memorable because we're like, what are they doing? We just talked about that on the Phantom Menace episode.
Right.
What is his plan? We've got 6 scenes where they're talking about it and we don't know what the hell is happening. There's no photo finish.
If only this movie had an embargo that needed to be signed. That's what was missing.
Usually the problems arise whether it's from a movie or, a script of somebody who's new and trying to figure this out in the villain's plan. Right, if they're writing an arc plot Hollywood story, either there's no photo finish that we can't picture. The stakes are muddy. They're like abstract. You can't picture the stakes. They don't put a face on the stakes. There's no deadline. It's all very ambiguous as to what the villain wants, why they want it, and what has to be done to stop the villain from succeeding. Therefore, we don't feel much about the villain. In this case, though,
it's so weird.
It's so weird, but it's so simple. It's
simple, but it feels there's the why now of it isn't present as
the why now isn't really present. But there is a deadline.
You could almost argue Furiosa is the one who enacts the plan.
She is.
And then
now we know the plan. The villain's plan is a reaction to Furiosa.
Right.
very interesting and
his goal is just
subversive.
get my stuff back.
Yeah.
Like,
What's his photo finish? Recapture his wives and take them back to the
Citadel.
Citadel. Very easy
Status
to picture.
quo achieved.
Very easy to get status updates because we see the wives and we know once he has them and they're back that he has succeeded. So simple. What
Kill
is
Furiosa. Probably.
It's part of the part of it, but it's
of it.
really just to get his wives back.
Yeah.
Reward and stakes, future generation. They're both in the same future generations of warlord dictators. Which we see that's the one thing like that he really is like consistently caring about is like, yeah, I want my property.
Yeah.
And deadline is very easy to measure too, which is before Furiosa moves them far enough away that he can't get them back, or before someone out there in the wasteland kills them. That's also something that's possibly going to happen. So I feel like this is a great example of a very simple villain's plan. But like you said, Bob, it's very subversive in that his plan is a response to the hero's plan.
Right. Well, he's not. It's just another day in the Citadel. He's not doing anything. There's no enacting of a new thing.
But the second that he sees her go off course,
that's the plan, right?
The plan goes in motion, and that's at like 15 minutes. So from 15 minutes on, we know exactly what the villain wants, and we can follow it very simply, and we can measure the stakes because they're personified in the wives. So it's a great instructive example of how to execute a very simple villain's plan.
Right.
Yeah, it's weird. I do think there are some movies, I mean, obviously, where the hero is the one, like as much as we talk about the villain's plan dictates the action movie, I think it depends on, again, save the cat genres, which I won't go into. Whereas Golden Fleece might have one set of things and Dude with a Problem has another. So Dude with a Problem often is villain's plan centric, but a Golden Fleece, and I think John Wick might even fall into this category or something, where it's like the action hero decides, I'm going to do this thing and nobody's going to stop me, like Kill Bill. And then the villain just becomes all about trying to stop them. Like that's their plan, basically.
So Furiosa is John Wick in this.
Yeah, in some ways.
Pretty
like
much,
she has a mission and the bad guy just goes all in to try to stop her.
Right.
And I think we could probably list some other ones that are like that as well. Any kind of escape movie or robbery movie or I have to kill someone movie or something like that. There's probably a bunch of them.
But specifically talking about Immortan Joe, another reason why he's such a great villain is because he's got a simple to follow plan. So.
Right. And last thing on villain construction, formidable threat and making them suffer. Whose is this?
Yeah, this is mine too. It's just another ingredient to the great iconic villain is how formidable they are, because I read a lot of scripts where like the hero is always one step ahead of the villain and the hero always has the upper hand and everything's way too easy and the hero rarely suffers in order to defeat the villain. And I think this is a great example of how Immortan Joe just uses all the powers at his hand to make them suffer. Like everybody who's making the character suffer is an extension of Immortan Joe's, reach and grasp. Like he's the one who's putting all of this stuff into motion that causes suffering for our heroes throughout the story. And like,
except for the canyon people, which
the canyon bikers,
that's the only one I can think of.
Everything else,
or the elements of the world itself. But
right.
Right.
But the like some great simple things of how he's formidable is you just want to keep piling on how you can't get the upper hand for long against your villain. So like, Furiosa takes a sudden turn off the path. We're like, oh shit, like we don't know what she's doing yet, but she's clearly got the upper hand here. You can feel that, right? Like, whoo. But like literally like 15 seconds later, it cuts to the Citadel and Immortan Joe's people were like, Pa, what's she doing? And like they look and Immortan Joe then calls for backup and he sends his army after them. And then once the army is on their way, he calls for even more backup. And oh shit, now they have 3 wasteland armies against them. So there you go. It's piling on the obstacles, making his threat level escalated. And then he even gets more personal, right? Like he personally promises Nux, passage to the afterlife if he does this thing to motivate him, right? That's a formidable action, and then one of the wives gets thrown into his cockpit and he's like holding a gun to her head while he's driving head to head with Furiosa. I mean,
he's as
after
skilled,
time.
if not more than them, right?
As skilled. Yeah, he is. She never is able to like outskill him until the end, when she gets him. So I just think if you watch and study this and study the ways that Joe specifically and his army pile on the obstacles, it's another reason why he feels like such an iconic villain.
Good stuff. That's a lot. I'm just going to point out to our listener Michael, that was a lot of stuff about villain construction. Okay, I hope that satisfies any need.
I was gonna put praise of the killer speeches on there, but there aren't really any. It's more like one sentence here, one sentence there. Somebody's like, "He broke the world." Another person's like, "He's a bad man." Another like,
yeah, there's not really a
It's like if you put all of their one sentence like praises together, it would just make this interesting paragraph.
It's more of a visual praise of the killer speech,
yeah.
Right? It's like the movie itself is doing the praise of killer.
Bowing to him.
Yeah, right. Right. Seeing the Citadel is enough of a praise of a killer. Yeah. Okay. We get it. This guy's got everybody.
They're literally praising him.
Yeah, they're praising him like a god. So, okay. All right. Premise pretzels. The most delicious type of pretzel.
This is mine. But I wanted to ask Jamie, can you kind of you do a great job explaining like the concept of premise pretzel that was born out of this show.
Yeah. So premise pretzel is there's a thing we talk about basically called like premise paint or premise ideas, where you come up with an idea. It's kind of like what we talked about a little earlier, and then you think of what the premise is. And in this case, we're talking about post-apocalyptic. We're talking about cars, gasoline, whatever the kind of stuff we're
like you said, a siege movie at 80 miles an hour.
What the gimmicks are, right? That are particular to this very specific world. So how is a car chase different in this world than a car chase in another world? That would be kind of our premise paint, premise delivery kind of ideas. And a premise pretzel is when you have something that happens that's very specific to the premise, like one of these moments that happens, you'd only see it in this movie because it's very, germane to the concept, and it happens and it's really cool. But then later on, we bend it back. We almost get the mirror image or something like that of it, where we use it again in reverse somehow. And the one we always bring up, I think, is like Predator, where the monster is invisible, at first, and then Arnold is invisible to the monster later on.
Right.
Yeah. Right. And there's many versions of this kind of thing, but that's the essence of the premise pretzel.
A way that you simplified it once that I love, that I try to use when I teach clients, is one setup, many payoffs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people, when they think Chekhov's gun, they think it's only going to go off once, but you make these gigantic list of ideas that we always preach on your pad, iPad, cell phone, whiteboard, whatever it is that you use for idea generation. And then you might have 100, but then it's really a good idea to consolidate them and be like, how can I use like these 5 things 5 different ways instead of these 100 things once? One of the things that struck me, we just did this on the Batman Returns, and how many times the umbrella is used, the Penguin's umbrella is used like 6 different times, like in the different ways. They made a whiteboard for the Penguin's umbrella, stuff like that. That's why I call it the whiteboard within the whiteboard. You got your, like, the War Rig Fortress has a whiteboard, right? They did that. They sat down, they came up with a shit ton of ideas. And then they were like, all right, how can we play with these ideas throughout our time on the War Rig, right? So like some of the ones that were like awesome were like the rig door. There's like a door, a torn off door that they use, and the number of times they use it as a shield. They use it they throw it at somebody. They use it to get the wheels out of the mug. It's just such a simple idea. It's like a torn off door that they just have on hand for. I think one time somebody even puts it over their head as like shit's falling on them. Like, the bolt cutters. Like you simple. How many times in the movie do the bolt cutters come into play in unique different ways? Like, yeah, they're just cutting something, but they're cutting something that they didn't cut before, that you're like, oh my God, here come the bolt cutters. Yes. Max's blood tubing, like the chains, like you said, Jamie, that's like that chain blood tubing, all the whiteboard of the chains. And then later
the fight scene, and then he uses it again. Right.
He uses it to save Furiosa. So that's one simple idea that they just made a whole bunch of whiteboarding for. That's where you gotta ask, you gotta wonder whether the storyboard artist came up with these, and that's part of the writing credit. Furiosa's gear shift knife, how many different times that comes into play? It's used against Max. It's used against intruders. It's used against her. Like, it's so creative. Even Nux's, he loses his boot, and it has like 3 different moments. That boot, like one of the war boys is like, I got his boot.
Yeah, right.
Let me in, and then later, as a nice little moment of levity, when Max blows up some people off screen, he throws him his boot. Like,
he remembered.
That could have been throwaway, but they did a premise pretzel with it. They were like, what else could we do here that we already have, that we don't have to add? Some scenarios, just like you were saying, Jamie, with your example earlier, the escaping the Citadel. They're escaping the Citadel to seek the green place filled with water, plants, life, hope. And now that place doesn't exist. So what do they have to do? They have to go back into the Citadel in order to seek plants, water, life, hope. That is a premise pretzel. Max's hallucinations, first, they are what cause him to get captured. And then when he escapes, they almost trick him into like jumping off a cliff, like killing himself. So they almost kill him. But then in the end, they actually are what lead to his salvation. They save him from the scenario and help him escape and survive. So that's a nice 1, 2, 3, taking a scenario and twisting it, paying it off again and again and again. And then the guitar player whiteboard, there's an eventual fight on the guitar, and the guitar is swinging while they're fighting. Max is using the guitar as a weapon.
It's not just scene dressing, like something happens on that rig. Yeah,
exactly. My favorite one in the whole script, my favorite premise pretzel, is the giant swollen diseased foot of the guy, the people eater. They do this setup where they just show people tending to his like giant swollen foot, and then later, after Max kills him, they could have just left it there, but Max takes that diseased dead foot and puts it on the accelerator so he can climb on top of the car. It's such a great premise pretzel. Oh my God, it's such great writing. I was like clapping in my seat alone when they put the swollen dead foot on the accelerator.
Amazing.
This is a great example, and like all the ways that they use the Morton Joe's skull brand, the Citadel brand, you know. There's a whiteboard for that, right? It's on the back of people's things. It's on the belt. It's on the ceiling of the war rig. Car. Yes.
Yeah.
It's very, this movie is a great example of how to take the whiteboard and make a whiteboard within the whiteboard, and one setup, many payoffs.
Good stuff. You want to talk about Dark Knight of the Soul or D-Knots?
D-Knots.
D-Knots.
This is really my question for Jamie, because I can't remember what episode it was recently, Jamie. Maybe you will. It was like very recently we watched one of the movies where it felt like they had multiple Dark Knight of the Souls, and we were talking about that, how that's an interesting choice.
What episode was that?
I don't know. I almost want to say 10 Things I Hate About You. It was like the Dark Knight of the Soul happened, and then like 10 minutes later, the Dark Knight of the Soul happened again. And it was different.
That one was, I remember that one's weird, because that's the one where we kind of debate like what is the All Is Lost and stuff like that, and what is the finale.
Jamie's wearing a Save the Cat hat, by the way. So this is
very on brand, Jamie.
He's the right person to ask about this. So Jamie, do you want to go into it, and then we'll just like talk about it?
Yeah, the Dark Knight of the Soul is a Save the Cat beat. It's one of the primary 15 beats. it always follows the all is lost beat and a save the cat, format. So the all is lost is like the worst thing that could happen. Somebody dies. In this case, the all is lost I peg as when they get to the destination and they realize it doesn't exist. That's the all is lost. It's like, oh crap.
They realize
it
they
doesn't exist.
passed through it.
They passed
even.
through it.
Yeah.
And it was dead.
Yeah.
And Furiosa goes to her knees. I mean, it's the quintessential image of what you picture with Dark. She goes to her knees and screams to the universe.
And
that frame, it could be in like the dictionary next to Dark Knight of the Soul.
Yes.
Right. And so usually the reaction to that all is lost, whatever that, the death of the dream, the death of a person, something like that, the wallowing in the sadness and the what do we do now? That's the Dark Night of the Soul. And then there's usually some hope that brings them out of there that ends up being the break into 3 that goes into the finale. So whatever pulls them away from the Dark Night of the Soul and sends them on a new mission, like let's go back home and kick some butt.
Well, that tracks with this because then they make the plan to go to the Citadel instead of through 160 miles of salt.
Yeah. So for that reason, I would say this is a classic Dark Knight of the Soul territory. Dark Knight of the Soul can be multiple scenes and stuff like that, but usually it fits in that sandwich, so to speak, between All is Lost and the break into 3. And that's usually what Dark Knight of the Soul does.
So now that we've shown that it does have your classic one that fits our classic structure, I feel like after that, lots more moments also feel like Dark Knights of the Soul. Like when Nux sacrifices himself to save the team. That feels like a Dark Knight of the Soul. Like when Furiosa gets stabbed, it feels like the lowest moment of the movie for me. And when many of the old women are getting killed in the efforts to save the team, and then it's punctuated by the death of the one that we've gotten to the most, which is like the Keeper of the Seeds lady dying. That really feels, that's after the Furiosa couple minutes of her getting stabbed and us worrying about that. That also feels like a Dark Knight of the Soul. So I was wondering, like, all that works in my opinion, and I was wondering if there's anything we can learn from it, like why that feels like that. Whether I'm wrong,
I think Max sets it up and it makes it feel like they don't. It doesn't to me. They do feel like that, but also he says it's going to be a bad day, but we can get through it together, and that sets it up.
Get ready for Dark Knights of the Soul.
Get ready for a lot of bad stuff to happen.
Okay,
but if we make it through, we'll have hope again, or whatever.
So,
there's light at the end,
and there's a couple things. I mean, all of those deaths don't necessarily rattle their kind of character arc cage. You know what I mean? They're just they go to sadness,
rattle their character.
Whereas the not finding the place they had hoped to get to, like their main goal and battled, like that shifts that transforms them into different people and different goals and different, it changes them. Whereas these other ones I just think are kind of the bumps in the road of they're the momentary bumps in the road. Now, that said, a lot of times in the finale, which I think that whole extended sequence of going back is, I think that's the finale. It can have, and I didn't track it for this, but the Hightower, we talk about the Hightower surprise. That can be a moment where it's very similar to the All Is Lost and has a very similar beat to the Dark Knight of the Soul, where they have to dig down deep and do something a little different. But would
that be Nux? Would that be like the Nux moment?
It could be.
Or when they jump onto Morton Joe's car and sort of start attacking him.
Right.
I mean, she's climbing on Furiosa's climbing on Joe's car, moving car.
And she's bleeding out, right?
Right. And usually that's where it kind of is a point where they've arced so much that now they have to kind of come up with a new plan because they're, whatever personality they are now, they're not going to give up. So a lot of times that can, and I think in 10 Things I Hate About You, that's the part that got a little confusing because it felt like, oh, this could be the Hightower surprise, or it could be the All Is Lost, or it was kind of a little tricky with that. But usually when I look at the big picture, I think of hero goal, obstacle stakes. So what's their goal? Their goal is to get to this new place. The All Is Lost is, oh no, that place doesn't exist. That's the Dark Knight of the Soul. They failed their goal. The goal, the whole purpose of this trip, failure. They can't
All
get
that
there.
is very tangible.
Very
Yes.
tangible.
Yeah.
And I think those other things are just character moments. Like
Maybe I was just caring too much about those other characters.
You were just in it. You were
I
just
was
in it,
just in
Jimmy.
it.
That's all.
I was
That's
like,
it.
no, the keeper of the seeds.
Yeah.
Right.
A lot of times in finales of movies
Who's
like
gonna
this,
plant them?
there are a lot of deaths sprinkled about, especially when you have a team this big that you can kill people off and stuff. And it definitely, there's a lot of personal sacrifices so that each character can get their own redemptive moment and get their shine kind of in the end as well, which is, I think, what happens here. They give each character a little shine.
That's helpful.
Yeah.
I think that's like a perfect lead in to the last point, which I put in, but I just wanted to talk about it with you guys because, okay, whose Dark Night of the Soul is it? I would say it's not Max's Dark Night of the Soul.
Yeah.
Like he hopes for the best for them, but he's kind of like, it sucks. I don't think he was ever thinking of the green plates or anything, right? So the Dark Night of the Soul that Jamie just talked about, I would say is almost specifically Furiosa's, right? Like we can all sort of agree on that, right? So I guess I wanted to ask, like, first, who's the protagonist of this movie, which was pretty contentious argument back in the day on the internet about, Max not being the star of his own movie. But like, who do you guys actually feel is the protagonist of this movie?
I'm gonna let Jamie go first.
And it's funny because the other thing I read before we did this, I read Script Shadow's review of this like years ago. And I don't usually agree with hardly anything Script Shadow is very grumpy a lot of
He's
times.
very abrasive.
And while Script Shadow liked this movie, he did complain about the Max Furiosa split, whatever. And his theory was, and this is probably something that was in that book I read and forgot, that somehow in the shakeout from Mel Gibson being the part to Furiosa, like maybe they were moving on from Mel Gibson and they wrote the part for Furiosa, but then somebody said, "Oh, you need Mad Max in there. We're not financing this thing," and they brought Mad Max. There's kind of like
I don't think that's true, though.
I don't remember that being true in that book.
I think Miller always intended to have Max in there, and I think he serves a very important function in the movie.
Yeah. And so where this becomes tricky is, my gut is to say Furiosa is the one that arcs and goes back and has the hope and goes back. However, Furiosa has like no setup in this movie, really. It's just like she's already on the mission and stuff like that. So we don't really see her flaws are kind of on the road.
I was going to say she does maybe has more hope in the end, but Furiosa still strikes me as someone who has more information at the end, but doesn't really change as a person. I feel like Furiosa would at the end would do the exact same thing at the beginning. She is the same person. She just found new information out. Oh, I should have just done it here. Like,
right.
You know what I mean? Like she has new information.
Yeah, well, that's why I think she's Arc of Awesome. Like she changes everyone around her.
Yeah. There's that.
And the world.
I was going to say Max feels kind of Arc of Awesome to me too. However, both of them to me have very similar arguments. You can make the same argument where Max, I do think there's something about his guilt and all that redemption.
I was going to say
blah,
the
blah,
guilt.
Blah.
It's edited into there, but
it is.
It's all those hauntings of him stop in the third act of the movie, and I feel like if he saves them, he saves himself, sort of, right? And that is an arc. He does change at the end, I feel like.
And that's why I nudge towards Max being I actually nudge towards him because he does get a setup of that, even if it's voiceover, even if, I run from dead things or
living in the dead.
The living in the dead. I mean, he does get a setup as far as a flaw, and he does change in that he doesn't trust her at first. He goes from somebody that is out for himself to somebody willing to die for others
for the team.
Again.
Right.
And then in the end,
He's
take
not
is
anymore.
when he walks off and goes off on his own. This is my own interpretation of it, but I feel like he's whole now and he can go back and fix things amongst his own world or find his own path, where maybe he couldn't in the beginning. Maybe it was
or maybe he learned that you had. Oh, go ahead, Jimmy.
Using what we've done in the show in the past to figure this out. We often try to go back. My favorite one, Bob, that you did is in the Batman to show the before and after snapshot.
Mm-hmm.
To both of your points and Jamie, the quote you just used, it feels very intentional when you just look at it from that and nothing else, the before and after snapshot. When we meet him, he says to the audience, we see him, being haunted by his, his failures. He says, I am the one who runs from the living and the dead, hunted by scavengers, haunted by those I could not protect. That is how we meet him. And in the end, he's walking through a crowd of scavengers. Those are scavengers. And he's got a smile on his face. So he's like no longer haunted by the ones he couldn't protect. Like he redeemed himself for the ones he couldn't protect before by protecting new people. So I feel like it's very intentional there.
He also kind of learned, and it's a little bit darker. He also kind of learned that you can't protect everyone, but you can try.
You can try,
and you don't have to like kill yourself over it. Like he's gonna obviously. I mean, I don't know what the intention was with the end for Miller, but it felt like, and there he is, off onto the new adventures.
Yep.
And now he does not going to be haunted every time. He can all he can do is try to help. He can't save everyone.
Yeah.
So that's like a change. I think that's a very valuable change.
Whereas, like when we've done Arc of Awesome, do you want to describe Arc of Awesome, Jamie? Because I feel like people might be confused who've never heard it.
Yeah, Arc of Awesome, or flat arc, sometimes described. It's kind of like somebody who does an arc, but everybody's trying to force them. Like they're kind of good in the way they are, and then the world tries to force them to change by putting punishment after punishment and pain after pain. Superman. But Forrest Gump. And in doing so, they change the people around them, but in the way they kind of, they're unrelenting, whatever. Good. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I feel like Furiosa's like, she is everyone who comes in the path of her, and her mission gets better.
Furiosa,
and then the world gets better.
Furiosa doesn't need to change. She's already like got what the world should be in her mind, and a goal set on how to fix it. Okay. Well, I think that kind of helps answer the protagonist question, but it's still fuzzy, right?
Max, Jamie, I think you're right. It is fuzzy, but
I just feel like he has something set up. So especially,
you're right.
So
and the only reason I wrote Nux on the arc thing is because Nux's arc,
he has an arc.
I feel like he has the most prominent of arcs, right? Like in the entire movie, it feels like he has the giant.
He has his eyes open to the evil patriarchy.
He is so different. He's so unbelievably different at the end than he is at the beginning. But yeah, the protagonist question on this movie has been hanging off of it since day one.
I'm so glad you brought it up. It was great. It made me think.
Well, people complained about it for years. They're like, Mad Max took a back seat, and it's like, no, he didn't. You just don't understand. Okay, I think that's all of our talking points, guys.
Man.
Mad Max Fury Road. Do you guys have anything you want to plug? Say anything? Send us questions to the email writersblockbusterspodcast@gmail.com, right?
Yeah, I think we're like one away. What's funny is I want to keep it fresh, and we get lots of questions, but they're from the same like 8 people.
Right.
Thank you to those 8 people.
Oh yeah, super thank you.
But like, yeah. We only need like one more, and we can do an entire episode that's just answering screenwriting questions.
I'm just going to go on ChatGPT and say, ChatGPT, what questions would you ask our podcast? See what it says. So, yeah, kind of in regards to that too. And we asked for this once before, and everybody did awesome. But if you're new to the podcast or anything, go give us a review. Go shout us out a little bit. We'd love to reach more people. It's so hard to reach people nowadays. And you might think it's like, those guys don't need my help or something. But even if you're one person out there and you write a review, or you do a retweet, or you say, hey, my favorite podcast is this, go listen to it, or something like that. It actually brings, we're not looking for millions of people. So we're trying to change like tens of people's minds
Tens of
to watch
people
at a time.
trying to help tens of
So-
people write better scripts.
No,
Yeah.
no,
So if
just
you
help
can
us
bring-
fight the algorithm, man. The
Yeah.
algorithm is so bad now.
If you can bring one friend to the party, it actually is a big deal. I mean, it's a percentage of our audience. So, so go try to bring one person, either through a review or a shout out or something like that. If you can do
It
that,
really helps.
it would be a
Does.
huge help. Yep,
Yeah, just a share. It's like click retweet and don't even write anything. It's fine.
exactly.
That would
And there are a handful of people who do that on a regular basis.
All the
and
time.
and thank you to all of them. Yeah.
All the time.
But I think that's everything, guys, then.
Yeah.
Yep.
We'll see everybody next time.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Hey, this is Bob Rose, and thank you for listening to Writers Blockbusters. If you'd like to financially support the show, please consider joining my Patreon. I've been producing the podcast for several years completely out of pocket, and I'd like to keep producing it ad-free and no longer at a loss. If you'd like to help, head on over to patreon.com/Bob Rose Sucks. That's right, Bob Rose Sucks. And if you want the one and only Jimmy George to help polish up that writing project you're kind of struggling with, head on over to scriptbutcher.com. As a listener, you already know he's the best there is, scriptbutcher.com. You can also support the show by simply sharing it or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. We appreciate both. Thank you for listening and see you next episode.